War Z may not be the most ideal version of the game, which stretches beyond the usual Nintendo Switch compromises. The World War Z Aftermath content never made its way to the platform, with no indications of the overhauled experience coming to the Switch. If you ignore that, World War Z still offers plenty of Left 4 Dead-style fun, especially when playing with friends. It's probably the closest thing you'll get to Valve's take on the zombie horde shooter on Nintendo's system, along with the Zombie Army titles.
God damn it, stop!
That's enough, everybody!
Gas bag, coming in!
Plants vs. Zombies Battle for Neighborville is a streamlined take on the Garden Warfare series with more of a live service structure. The Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare games featured tons of variants to each class, from inflamed to poison-fueled pea shooters. As more classes were introduced in the second game, all these variants made for a messy meta. Because of this, Plants vs. Zombies Battle for Neighborville can be picked up and understood a little more easily, especially compared to Garden Warfare 2. Zombie Army Trilogy is a remastered compilation of games you probably never heard of prior to this release. That's because the first two Zombie Army games were standalone downloadable content for Sniper Elite 2, which is just before the series started becoming big. The third game is an entirely new inclusion to Zombie Army Trilogy. It essentially plays like Sniper Elite 2, except with zombies and a new dismemberment system, because killing zombies wouldn't be as satisfying without it. For Left 4 Dead fans, all of the classic playable characters from Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 are included, which is a nice nod to a series that likely inspired Zombie Army in the first place. Into the Dead 2 is one of the Nintendo Switch's most visually impressive titles. At first glance, you might almost think it's too good to be running in real time. As it turns out, there's a reason for these relatively high-fidelity visuals. Into the Dead 2 is an endless runner in shooter form. You're constantly moving forward, shooting any zombies in your path, vaulting over obstacles, and picking up supply drops. Resident Evil Revelations Collection Packs, one solid Resident Evil title along with a more humdrum installment. Resident Evil Revelations is an excellent remaster of a 3DS title, which you wouldn't know just by playing it. Its exploration and puzzle solving is a little streamlined compared to older games, but it sports high production values. You feel like you're playing a game with tons of money and love poured into it. Resident Evil Revelations 2 is the complete opposite. It was crafted as a smaller-scale title, originally released episodically. That lack of investment shows, particularly in the cinematic presentation. Additionally, it sees you revisiting the same linear levels twice as two separate sets of characters in an attempt to lengthen the runtime without creating new assets.
I'm going home! Who is that? Come
This remaster brings the Xbox original cult classic to modern platforms. Stubbs the Zombie in Rebel Without a Pulse places you in the role of a zombie on a mission to create an army of undead soldiers to combat the living soldiers in its fictional town that looks oddly futuristic despite taking place in 1959. It's a very tongue-in-cheek action game with B-movie vibes and references to plenty of older films. The Nintendo Switch version of Stubbs the Zombie features improved visuals, new content, and a reworked control scheme.
That hand for my job! Oh God! Not like this! Oh God! Not like this!
The House of the Dead remake is exactly what it sounds like. It recreates the iconic 90s light gun shooter with modern rendering features. Unlike some other games brandishing the remake moniker, this title remains true to the original gameplay and pacing. This means anybody that likes the original game will almost definitely enjoy the remake, even if they hold a special place in their hearts for its antiquated polygonal look. The enhanced graphics definitely make the game moodier than it ever was. Dying Light Platinum Edition is one of those Switch ports that you never thought would be possible. While it might not play quite as well as some of the bigger boys in console gaming, it does work on the Switch and it is still great. The world is absolutely packed full of zombies, making it a genre entry unlike any other on the console. Whether you are fleeing from a horde or using any blunt object imaginable to maintain an element of stealth, there is a real tactility to the undead on display, and a masterful feat of bringing a big old game to a portable device. Death Road to Canada isn't your typical road trip simulator. The existence of a zombie horde as you travel the country sure makes that impossible. You'll end up making various pit stops at cities across the randomly generated world, killing zombies and attempting to rescue survivors along the way. There's a trait system influencing how major choices can play out. For some random fun, Death Road to Canada even features a character creator that will then randomly spit the created character into the game as a helpless NPC that will probably be eaten by a zombie. Zombieland Double Tap Road Trip is a top-down zombie twin-stick shooter. The game is based on the Zombieland movie series, a post-apocalyptic comedy movie starring Woody Harrelson and Jesse Eisenberg. The game is seen from a third-person perspective with a twin-stick shooter layout and a limited shooting range. Most of the movie cast is here as playable characters. The player starts off with a normal pistol and expands with better and more powerful weapons later on in the game. Between the stages, the player can upgrade its character stats including health, damage, speed, and special meter fill rate. Overall, the game is a lot of fun if you enjoy some brainless shooting and silly dialogue.
Now you... Well, what have we here?
Darkwood is a unique top-down survival horror game. The player controls a mysterious protagonist who tries to escape a spooky forest full of dangerous, creepy monsters. The game features a semi-open world structure, with the player unlocking new locations when progressing in the story. Darkwood features a full crafting system, a skill tree, a night and day cycle, and the ability to trade with other NPCs. During the day, the player can roam the map looking for supplies and crafting materials. Also, the player can spend time building and fixing a shelter to stay protected during the harsh night. During the night, the player cannot leave the shelter, as he must protect it from different monsters such as mutants and ghost-like creatures. Overall, the game is well balanced, offering a perfect mix of horror and sandbox survival elements. Zombie Night Terror is a 2D pixel art strategy zombie game. The player controls hordes of zombies aiming to annihilate the human race. Each level offers a certain objective to complete. These objectives vary from killing a certain number of humans to finding an escape way. Aside from the main objective, there are also extra objectives to meet for completionists, like killing specific people or doing signature kills. At first, you start by killing regular civilians, but the game gets tougher and tougher as you progress. Civilians will wield handguns, shotguns, or even put mines in your way. You also have a full power-up command at your service. For example, the player can make a zombie explode, spreading the virus and turning other humans into zombies, or launch a speed power-ups leading the humans to their doom. The 8-bit art style is beautiful to look at, especially if you like retro looks. On the whole, Zombie Night Terror is an amazing strategy game offering unique levels and a gory trip to the old-school pixel art style. Zombie Driver is a zombie vehicular combat video game. The game was originally released on the PC and then ported later to late-gen consoles, including the Nintendo Switch. Set in a post-apocalyptic world, after a virus pandemic, most of the human population has been turned into zombies. Now it's your turn to survive this harsh world by driving your beloved cab and smashing through hordes of zombies. The game is seen from a top-down view where the goal of each run is to kill as many zombies as you can. You can do this by either ramming the zombies or using the mounted weapons on your vehicle. The player starts off with a cab and eventually unlocks new cars, each with its own strength and weapon selection. For example, the cab has a machine gun weapon to use at ease, the bus has a flamethrower, and the sports car is faster and easier to handle. In addition to the normal zombie enemies, there are also boss encounters where the player challenges giant mutant monsters. The game is great for what it tries to, offering a fun experience especially if you enjoy short gaming sessions. Deadly Days is a roguelike strategy zombie game. The game starts off pretty simple and gets a bit on the strategic side later. The player starts off by choosing different specialties which will affect the party's survival skills. Each day the party takes off on a trip to scavenge for food and items. The player moves on a relatively small map, fighting off the hordes of zombies and collecting spoils. Once the area is completely cleared, the party hops in back to the base to manage the supplies. The combat in the game is pretty much automatic, since all you do is manage the position and strategies. The character will shoot the zombies automatically once pointed toward them, making the game more of a management simulation. Checking up the food supplies every night is crucial, since the crew will need to eat every night. Also, it's important to make sure that the survivors are well equipped, since the game difficulty rises further up in the game. On the whole, the game is pretty much a solid management game, offering both simple yet beautiful 8-bit visuals and an engaging gameplay system. Dead by Daylight is a multiplayer survival horror game. Up to 5 players can play the game. One is the chaser, who will chase other players and sacrifice them, while the other 4 players must escape and repair several generators to open the escape route. The game takes huge emphasis on modern pop and video game culture, including a huge cast from both classic horror movies and popular video games. For example, survivors can assume the role of Jill and Leon from the Resident Evil series, as well as Detective David Tapp from the movie series Saw, and many more. When playing as the Chaser, the player must hunt down the survivors and sacrifice them. The player can do this by using a weapon that depends on the killer he chooses. Overall, the game is well worth it with a ton of content to enjoy and decent visuals for Switch lovers. Unlike any other game on this list, Telltale's The Walking Dead is a purely narrative-focused experience. There isn't much player agency outside of moving a cursor around for basic environmental interactions. You'll also occasionally solve sometimes admittedly obtuse puzzles, but it's the dialogue and choices that you'll remember most. In truth, Telltale bluffs a lot, with the signature this character will remember that not actually amounting to much in most instances. Still, it tells a good story. It was also one of the first in this modern wave of interactive narrative adventures.
Looks like they made it back in one piece. Come on, meet them halfway.
Zombie Army 4 expands on the fast-paced chaos that made Zombie Army Trilogy a success. It also happens to be one of the best Nintendo Switch conversions of an 8th-generation console game. Whether playing solo or with 3 other players, Zombie Army 4 mixes the zombie hordes with some of the best elements from the Sniper Elite series it spun off of. This includes upgraded version of the X-ray kills, going even further with full-on dismemberment. There's also a pretty in-depth progression system for each of the characters. Resident Evil 5 takes the basic gameplay formula established by Resident Evil 4, while adding co-op and modernizing its predecessor's dated design decisions. The ability to quick swap weapons makes such a difference to the aggressive, contextual combat on display. People may not be a fan of the lighter mood, but as a pure action title, Resident Evil 5 is a more refined version of the combat system Resident Evil 4 introduced. Co-op also makes the game even more entertaining, letting you perform beautifully coordinated attacks against swarms of enemies. The Resident Evil Origins Collection bundles the 2 best classic survival horror games that are playable on Nintendo Switch. The package includes remasters of Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil Remake. Unlike the later remakes, this first remake more closely emulates the gameplay foundation survival horror games were built on, with fixed camera angles, semi-auto aiming, and a larger focus on puzzles and exploration. If you're yearning for a return to the genre's roots on Nintendo's hybrid system, you won't find better than Resident Evil Origins Collection. Resident Evil 4 is one of the most iconic video games in history. If you haven't played it, you can't go wrong with the Nintendo Switch version, which holds up just as well as its PS4 and Xbox One counterparts. Certain aspects of its design haven't aged well, particularly the mishmash between constant action and the archaic weapon swapping system. The constant pausing mid-encounter gets in the way of the flow state Resident Evil 4 is so close to achieving. Enemy AI is also prone to bugging out. Despite these flaws, it's still a great game for those that want a little more action than horror.